I will start my presentation. Today, I'm going to start you out with a little bit of the biology, impacts, ecology of cheatgrass to sort of give you a background on how cheatgrass grows, where it can be found, how to identify it, and what it causes. And with that background, hopefully you'll have a better idea of how to control it, which will come after me. Give this a whirl. Okay, for a little bit of historical perspective, that's how I'd like to start it out. I listened for clues whether the West has accepted cheat as a necessary evil, to be lived with until kingdom come, or whether it regards cheat as a challenge to rectify its past errors in land use. I found the hopeless attitude almost universal. This is from Aldo Leopold, and it's in 1949. So as you can tell, cheat has been around for a long time, and people have been feeling hopeless about it for a long time. Another one. Has anyone a practical method by which annuals can be replaced and perennials reestablished in a density which would permit saying that the range has been brought back to its pioneer carrying capacity? This is C.E. Fleming, again, 1946. So this has been a problem for a long time, and people have been worried about the condition of range because of cheatgrass taking over. These are from the 40s, although cheatgrass was introduced in the 1800s, so I'm sure that feeling of hopelessness, as many of you are feeling, I'm sure, has been out there for a really long time. So let's start out with the nature of the beast. What are we talking about here? Names of cheatgrass. Cheatgrass, of course, that's what we're calling it here. Other names you'll hear are downy brome, and the scientific name is Bromus tectorum. So if you hear any of those names, you'll know what we're talking about. I'm going to talk a little bit about the basic characteristics of cheatgrass, and this will hopefully provide a pretty good basis for the rest of my talk and why cheatgrass is so competitive and does so well. First of all, it's introduced. When it came over from Eurasia, it didn't pack its suitcase along and, hey, enemies, stick your enemies in your suitcase and take them with you. Didn't do that. So it came over here, happy as a lark, no enemies. Second of all, it's cool season. So what it does there, it gets a start really, really early in the spring before anything else gets up. Any of the regular cool seasons, and obviously far before your warm season. And it's able to take up this moisture and grow really quickly and steal all the resource from the rest of the plants that are there. It's an annual, so it doesn't have to put all of its resources into these long-lived structures, such as, big woody branches or anything like that. It's able to put down its roots and just start producing lots of foliage up top and producing seeds, so it can, keep growing quickly and year after year. But it doesn't have to start from what it already grew the year before. And it's very prolific, so it grows quickly, it grows a lot, it grows, produces tons of seeds, and often this is much more than the native plants that you have out there. So this is sort of the basis for the whole rest of the presentation, and when I go through these other things, keep these basics in mind. So let's start with a little bit of identification. I know that you've seen it out there, you're professionals out there in the world, but let's talk about little things of cheatgrass to help you identify it. First of all, let me make sure I got this right. It's covered with these fine downy hairs. All the stems, leaves, everything has these fine hairs, and it also has a membranous ligule. So if you're questioning out in the field, these are a couple things to look for. It also has these long, droopy heads that have this purple coloration. It's especially midsummer that you'll see this show up. And also pretty long awns, as you can see here. So things to help you identify out in the field from other plants and grasses. So I talked about earlier, it's a cool season. So not only does it get a start really early in the spring, but in the fall, it can also sprout again when the weather conditions get right. And again, I said it was really prolific. You can see all of these seedlings in the fall, very, very dense stand. So it's getting a start when other things may not be growing as well. Cheatgrass also, like I said, it's able to grow really quickly, really fast, and produce all of this above ground vegetation, which results in a lot of litter accumulation and produces a lot of seeds, and this all sort of builds up on the top. And this is really important for a lot of the characteristics of cheatgrass and why, how it modifies its environment and why it is so competitive. You can see here, I don't know if you can see here, the screen is kind of small, but just thick, inches and inches thick for the litter. So seed production alone, on Cheatgrass Range near Boise, Idaho, average seed production is 478 pounds per acre. Keep in mind this is an annual plant. This is pretty incredible. And 13 to 20,000 seeds per meter squared. So if you think about meter squared, tens of thousands of seeds in that small area. As you can see here, if you can see here, this hiker has been hiking along in cheatgrass, and I'm sure you've all done the same or driven your vehicle through cheatgrass seeds in your socks for weeks. So this is an excellent way for cheatgrass to spread, and that's why it's so successful at what it does. So not only does it produce a lot of seeds, but the plant itself can grow in really dense stands. In degraded sagebrush ecosystems in Nevada, 10 to 13,000 plants per meter squared. So we just talked about 13 to 20,000 seeds, and you thought that was a lot, but you take tens of thousands of plants per meter squared, you've got a really big problem there, and I can guarantee nothing else is going to be able to fit into that little meter squared. And that's in Nevada, that's where it's really extensive, but also in Idaho, 6,500 plants per meter squared. Pretty big problem, pretty dense stands. As you can see here in this picture, all of the light colored material, that's all cheatgrass. I'm sure you've all seen it as you drive along and are in your native places. Cheatgrass is also really competitive. So again, this cool season annual, it starts really early in the spring. And it can outcompete hybrid crested wheatgrass, which we think of as being pretty aggressive and strong itself, and then also native grasses such as blue bunch wheatgrass that you see out on the range a lot. So it can outcompete those. And one way of how it does it is that cheatgrass is capable of producing twice the quantity of roots when it first germinates in the first 45 days. So again, starts really early in the spring, gets up, and has twice the amount of roots as the native plants before they have a chance to get up and going. So it starts early, and it is really prolific and outcompetes the other native, or even the non-native, such as crested wheatgrass, which is pretty aggressive itself. Another interesting thought, as I talked about earlier, 10 to 20,000 seeds per meter squared. Well, those seeds can act as a host for bad seed pathogens, such as fungus pathogens and stuff like that. So when you have that many cheatgrass seed, they act as this host, and then if there are any native seed in there, then their likelihood of sprouting is lowered because they have this mortality because of the fungal seed bank pathogen. So not only when it's growing does it outcompete it, but it stops the other native plants from being able to even get a start. Another thing, drought, although we may not be thinking of that as much this year because of all the water, but cheatgrass is really good and survives really well in drought conditions. The seeds are viable in the soil for 5 years. So you get a period of time and really droughty, no moisture, maybe it won't sprout as much then, but then you get a little moisture, boom, germinates, and it's good to go right after a drought. So that could be a problem in Wyoming's semi-arid rangelands. In addition, cheatgrass is really able to sprout at every little flush of moisture. So if you get a little flush of moisture, it's going to be there first before the other native plants can be there. However, cheatgrass is really opportunistic for the water, so it is green in the spring and green in the fall, but there's a really long in-between time when if cheatgrass is taken over an area, you may not have as much green time in between, and so that could be a problem for your forage and grazing. Cheatgrass also modifies the environment that it's in itself. It can raise the temperature of rangelands or of the soil up to 10 degrees C warmer in the interspaces between shrubs. So if you get this cheatgrass coming in to these spaces in between shrubs, it warms up the soil, and then if you get conversion of the sagebrush steppe to this cheatgrass, it modifies the environment to where it's more, the cheatgrass likes it more than the native grasses and the sagebrush because they don't like that warmer temperature. So it can actually modify the environment itself. So I've talked about all of these characteristics of cheatgrass, and it's pretty scary. You're probably all pretty scared. So when should we be most concerned about when cheatgrass is going to take over our rangelands? Managers should be concerned about cheatgrass invasion when perennial shrubs and forbs and larger native grasses are less than 10 plants per meter squared. So that's getting pretty sparse. And again, the perspective of the number of cheatgrass to the number of native plants is pretty spectacular. And so you have to have this low number of the native grasses, and cheatgrass has to be known to be adapted to the site. So up in some high alpine area, if there's less than 3 plants per meter squared, the cheatgrass may not be adapted to those areas at this time. So that may not be as big a concern. And cheatgrass can be present at minimal densities and still allow successful establishment of seedlings. And this is a big plug right here for prevention of cheatgrass takeover and making sure that your native rangelands and your native plants and perennials are healthy and able to, hold off the attack of the cheatgrass. So let's talk a little bit about where cheatgrass is known to be adapted to. This is just a model that Bradley et al. 2009 did, but the black colored area here is where cheatgrass is adapted to. It doesn't mean that it has already invaded those areas, although if you take a good look at it, cheatgrass is probably in most of those areas. But what happens if the climate changes? What happens if we get a 2-degree winter temperature increase? Well, as you can see, there's a lot more black in here, a lot more areas where cheatgrass would be adapted to. And if we zoom in on Wyoming, it's kind of fuzzy, but I still wanted to show this. You can see there are a lot of new areas that cheatgrass would be adapted to if there's just a 2-degree winter temperature increase. So for Wyoming, this presents, a pretty big change. If we get decreased summer precipitation, you can see, yikes, that's a little scary for cheatgrass in the future if we do get some of these new conditions. And not saying that this would happen, but there is a lot of potential in the future with different climate scenarios that cheatgrass could become even bigger of a problem than it is now. So let's look at Wyoming. This is 2010, and this is courtesy of the Wyoming County Weed and Pest Districts. The dark red color means that there is over 20,000 estimated acres of cheatgrass, which is most of Wyoming, as you can see here. There's a couple areas that have less, Sublet, Teton, still 100 or so estimated acres. So as you can see, cheatgrass is here, and it's here in pretty big quantities. And this is the trend for cheatgrass. So where is it increasing? Where is there going to be more cheatgrass? And as you can see, it covers all of Wyoming where cheatgrass is increasing. Little Crook County over here, it's static. However, there's probably a lot of cheatgrass there already, and there just may not be as much opportunity for more cheatgrass to come in, or kind of a one-year snapshot. So this could change. But in Wyoming, this is a big concern for all of us. So one thing that I haven't talked about yet that probably most of you know, but if you don't know, this is another really scary thing about cheatgrass, is the cheatgrass wildfire cycle. So in the springtime, cheatgrass comes up really early, produces a lot, and then creates that thick litter mats, all the duff. And then it is really susceptible to lightning, such as roadside sparks or lightning or anything like that, really susceptible to fire. And this is earlier in the season than it would have been normally had it not been covered in cheatgrass. So this area burns. Then sagebrush, because often cheatgrass is in the sagebrush communities, sagebrush does not resprout. And it takes 50 to 200 years for a full stand of sagebrush to come back again. However, cheatgrass comes right back in after the fire, produces all of its litter, and in, say, oftentimes 3 to 5 years, fire comes in again, and then you're left with all of these, what used to be sagebrush ecosystems, it's now cheatgrass, and this cycle continues. And sagebrush and other native plants can't get their foot in on that cycle because the fire continues and the sagebrush can't resprout. Again, cheatgrass creates its little microclimate and nothing else is able to come in.
Well, wouldn't a fire also help the other grasses? So it doesn't give those an edge to catch up with the cheatgrass?
Yes, I'm glad that you brought that up because I failed to mention another really big important part, in fact. So cheatgrass also is facilitated by fire, so it thrives under the increased nitrogen, and as you can see here, this is a cheatgrass after a burn, and this is just one in control. So after a fire, the cheatgrass comes in, likes the increased nitrogen, and grows even better than it did before. And so although grasses may be favored, it is favored even more because of that really quick germination and the big growth after a fire, and that it's facilitated by it. And then you end up with these huge hillsides or sagebrush areas just covered in the cheatgrass. And this is a really good picture to show the purple coloration of cheatgrass as well, just taking over rangelands. And another interesting point is, again, cheatgrass is an annual, so it doesn't hold the soil as well. So after a fire comes through, it's quick to establish, which is good to hold a little bit of the soil, but it's not these deep, big roots that sagebrush or the trees or the native grasses and perennials used to have. So you can lose a lot of soil, and there can be a lot of erosion because of this conversion to cheatgrass. There are a lot of ecological impacts, as you can imagine, from cheatgrass, and just to name a few, again, this increased fire frequency, which oftentimes eliminates a lot of the native ecosystems that used to be there. It alters the nutrient cycling and carbon dynamics in the soil. Again, it's facilitated by the fire, likes the nitrogen, and builds up a lot of litter, and so creates more carbon reserves, and so it changes these fundamental nutrient cycles that are in the soil. Like I just talked about, increases the erosion rate and severity because of the limited resources that it puts down to try to keep the soil, and also the limited time. Like I said, it sprouts early in the spring, sprouts early in the fall, but there's a lot of time in between that it's not really green and producing like a lot of our native plants do, which hold the soil. Reduces forage availability. There's that long time during the summer that no good forage available. It also cures really quickly, and it isn't as good of forage and it's not as palatable. So big problem for you producers out there. Again, like I talked about, changes in plant communities. In the Great Basin, huge conversion from sagebrush steppe ecosystems to just cheatgrass. Pretty much the whole Great Basin and covering almost the whole state of Nevada. And you can see that here in Wyoming as well, the changes in the plant communities because of cheatgrass coming in. And this, sage-grouse is an interesting topic, and a lot of us are concerned about sage-grouse, and the invasion of cheatgrass reduces the suitable conditions for sage-grouse as well. There's less native grasses, less palatable forbs, and cover for the sage-grouse, and so this could also be a really big problem. The economic impacts are numerous. Just from the fire perspective, the cost of controlling cheatgrass-fueled fires were about $20 million per year over the nation, and $10 to $15 million in southern Idaho alone, and this includes the rehabilitation costs. So millions and millions of dollars are being spent on this fuel fire cycle that cheatgrass induces, and trying to rehabilitate the places that have been burned to try to stop this cycle. A 1991 program to rehabilitate 688 acres or hectares in the Snake River Birds of Prey area cost about $100,000 alone. So huge amounts of money being spent on just fire and rehabilitation alone. But there's a lot of other economic impacts as well. Like I talked about, the loss of production on rangelands. There's also studies out there that if you control cheatgrass in areas, then your rates of gain in your cattle increase. So there's definitely a benefit for controlling the cheatgrass for your cattle and other things that you may be grazing as well. So cheatgrass, as you can tell from this presentation, is a very big problem to all of us. You're all here and want to learn about cheatgrass. Obviously it's something that's important to you, and hopefully we will be able to glean a little bit of light on what cheatgrass is, what it does, and I hope that I have done that for you, and I hope that the rest of the speakers and the tour today can help you with what we would be able to do about cheatgrass in the future. I don't know, I think that I'm not sure if we're taking questions or not, or I hope that this is really interactive, especially in the field, or just catch us, or ask questions at any time. So any questions right now, I'd love to take some. No, y'all fell asleep? Okay, go ahead.
Emergent cheatgrass is decent fodder. Once it's cured, most critters stay away from it because of those prickly seeds.
Right.
I've heard, however, that in Nevada, some cattle have been adapted to eating the cured grass. Is that true or not? They're already adapted, and then they bring them in because their mouths can withstand the cutting.
That could be. Have you guys heard anything about that?
So I read a few reports of some cattle out in the Great Basin that'll actually go through and lick those seeds up off the soil after they've dropped off. I mean, they're little high protein packages anyway, so the seeds are pretty nutritious. I don't know if they've just gotten calloused gums or something to where those awns don't poke in, but I've seen several different people that have reported that they've got some cows that have used those seeds at that point in time. I think maybe a safe benefit for most cases is that once they've got those spiny pieces on there, that the cows are generally going to avoid those. Or at least they're going to prefer something else over that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be my guess.
Yeah. Good question. I hope that we can train cows to eat something like that. That would be helpful. Any other questions?
Would you say it's affecting the water cycle too, because of the shallow root system not able to, the rainfall curve is not able to absorb the water like your native species would do. So therefore we're altering the water cycle by allowing more water to wash off.
That's an excellent point as well. Although in the cheatgrass areas, I can imagine that the thick litter buildup might decrease rainfall impact, and it might hold it a little bit more in the litter. But you know, once it gets to the soil, I imagine that it would kind of move on and wouldn't be held as well. Great point. More questions? Okay, I'm going to pass it on.